Hello everyone. Well, thank you very much for coming today. I really appreciate you giving your time to come and hear my talk on my Iraq deployment. I'd just like to point out Steve Metthorpe, who's in the front and centre. Steve was part of the Army History Unit that accompanied myself and Mel Cadden to the UAE and Iraq. Okay, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Ali Roche. I'm a curator of photos, film and sound here at the Australian War Memorial. And over the past decade, curators have been sent to war zones to collect material for the national collection. This ranges from large objects like armoured personnel carriers, such as Bushmasters, also known as Bushmasters, through to oral histories and uniforms. It has been the pinnacle of my career. I've just got to fix this up. Sorry, excuse me. And my glasses. I'm not used to wearing glasses and it's really freaking me out. It has been the pinnacle of my career to date to be selected for deployment and was something extremely high on my agenda to achieve. I was originally asked 6 months prior when the section head of Photos, Film and Sound, Hans Reppen, came up to me and said I could possibly be chosen for Afghanistan. I put that aside and got back into my work, and 6 months later I was called back into Hans's office and he stated to me, "You need to harden up. You've been selected for deployment to Iraq and you have 24 hours to make up your mind." I said to him then and there that I didn't need the 24 hours, that my answer was yes. To me, having the specialisation in current conflict and to be able to actually witness the troops in the field was like winning the lottery. This was not only an extremely valuable personal experience, but to have the understanding of our troops in situ was just incredible. And most importantly, extremely valuable for the National Collection here at the Australian War Memorial. There were 5 curators selected for this Middle East deployment, which were accompanied by defence personnel from the Army History Unit. Dave Whittaker, covering Navy aboard HMAS Newcastle, Senior Curator Shane Casey, of Military Heraldry and Technology, and Stuart Bennington, Curator of Official Records, covering the RAAF and the UAE and Qatar. And finally, Melissa Cadden, Senior Curator of Military Heraldry and Technology, and myself, who are covering the Army in the UAE and Iraq. The lead up to deployment involved inoculations, and I was lucky enough to receive 5 in a day. And the paperwork regarding security clearances was extensive. However, this was nothing compared to force prep, which is the mandatory training you must successfully complete before deployment. During force prep, Mel and I were issued with 4 sets of King G blue uniform. We had to go blue, as this would make us distinct from military. The kit consisted of, as you can see in the photograph, body armour and helmets. Force prep was full immersion into military life and culture, which was an excellent introduction for the civilian. In saying that though, everyone was more than happy to help or explain when a situation occurred that was left of centre for me. One of these instances was the gassing. Chemical warfare was a threat to Iraq and we had to be prepared for this. We were all allocated the appropriate clothing and were made go through the drills of placing this on. And when gas was called, this is when you had 30 seconds to put on your overalls, coat, mask and gloves. We all had a buddy to help with us to make sure that the mask was sealed properly. We were then ushered into a shed with the gas mask and clothes and walked around the inside perimeter. We were then greeted by a sergeant at the exit door that made us take off the mask and ask us our name and rank. This was enough time for you to experience the gas. Your eyes would sting and your lungs would burn. This was the only way to get rid of the crystals that were on you was to walk outside downwind with arms out and just keep on walking. We were then placed in queues outside the gas shed again, then enter the shed, and this time we had to put all the clothing on with eyes closed and breath held while the gas was released. Thankfully, we all passed, and the next step was deployment. We arrived at Al Manhad Air Base, Camp Baird, at the United Arab Emirates, named in honour of Corporal Cameron Baird, VC MG. It is Australia's main base in the Middle East and is the headquarters of Joint Task Force 633. It has a wide range of operational support including Operation Slipper, Operation Menatau, Operation Okra, which is what I was deployed on, and Operation Accordion. On arrival, we had a further 3 days of briefings and training. As our destination was Iraq, we undertook the warlike module, which was complete with realistic training scenarios, and I emerged from this feeling prepared to provide combat first aid in the battlefield or deal with a chemical threat in theatre. These were our accommodation blocks when we entered into Camp Baird, and I spent approximately 14 days on this base and met a lot of wonderful people. One such person was Lieutenant Cheryl Licorice, and I had a really funny talk to her about how she met her husband. She said that she met him at a nightclub, and when he stated that his last name was Licorice, she didn't believe him and made him show her his licence. We exchanged greetings on the way back from the showers at about 5 a.m. one morning in the dormitory, and we instantly struck up a bond. I'm a cyclist and she was a cyclist, so the conversation went way. It was then that I found out she was a trauma nurse with the Army, and I asked her would she mind being interviewed, and thankfully her answer was yes. This segment goes for approximately 5 minutes and reflects Cheryl's experience in this role. Just be warned that some of the content is graphic, as it goes into detail regarding a trauma case of an Iraqi soldier at the American hospital in Baghdad. Did you always want to deploy?
This time round, yes. Yes, I did. Army gave me my operating theatre nurse skills. I've had lots of opportunities to reteach those in my civilian life practice, and I just naturally gravitate towards teaching and supporting other people, so it was an easy choice. I always wanted to. I just felt like, a deployment would cement everything of my gift to give things back. So yeah, I definitely this time around wanted to deploy. Now the next one that I had is, he was an Iraqi soldier. Both these soldiers were middle-aged, like 40s. The Iraqi maybe was a bit older. Excuse me. He's come from a battle in Syria, IED again. Excuse me. He is a 21-year-old was with him and was killed at the site, so he's more concerned about that than himself. He's obviously had trauma surgery before coming to us because he had abdominal incision. The call that we got was recovery or reanastomosis of radial artery. So that's your heart here in your arm here to connect your radial pulse and part of your hand. So we knew we were going to do a vascular case. When we got up and when it came through, he in fact had already had abdominal exploratory surgery. They found nothing there, so he had a wound here. He had a chest drain already. It was just way more than just this radial artery. His whole hand was, I'll show you at the end. His whole hand was torn, partially degloved, the back of his hand, bone exposed here. It was just enormous, and it wasn't just this lower part of his arm. He also was completely torn up. The upper part of his arm, he had whole heap of wounds on the right arm as well. So this day, obviously, the task we were to do was a vein graft for anastomosing here. It wasn't just his radial artery; it was the ulnar vessels. You could see the ligament. That's about all you could see left there. A lot of muscles. So 2 surgeons working on him. One starts on the arm. Another surgeon starts to do the graft. Went for the left thigh. His femoral artery there had it's called a trifurcation. So it had 3 other branches off it, so it was not conducive for grafting. So I had to sew that one back up and then take a graft from the next leg. So we've gone this day, spent about 6 hours on him, done as much as was able to be done. He's gone back to ICU intubated, so he's still got the tube in and he's still asleep on a ventilator. So he's spent a rough night in ICU. Comes back to us the next day, and it's been identified in between here that he also has an unstable C2, a cervical vertebrae. So now he's come back for theatre and he's now got a collar on as well. And we had 2 teams, my one team broken into 2 to do 2 procedures on him. This day we're doing his arms, both arms. So many hours again. At completion of that, you'll be amazed at the photographs and the difference that the repair has started to make. So after that, we finished that, we then also turned him to check out his back fragmentation. He's like peppered all over his back and buttocks. So we did some debriding of his buttock and did a scrub down and wash out of his shrapnel wounds, and that was it. And we took him back over to ICU. The next morning, he had dressings put. He was moving back to Iraqi healthcare. Yeah, I don't have to say anything. You can already see it. They did a wound dressing. They pulled this dressing down and done a full wound dressing back on him. So whilst he's still intubated, and then they've extubated him, and a couple of hours later, he's gone. That's remarkable. Unbelievably remarkable. And he's stable enough to do that. You know, when you think back in our own country, he would have been in ICU for a long time, and he's got a long road ahead of him. I don't know what his outcome is. I don't feel as confident as I did with the other patient what his recovery is going to be, but remarkable. And again, honoured to be able to be part of that. I feel it reinforces our worth, our purpose of being there. We've had a brilliant opportunity to be able to be embedded as Australians into the American hospital. I think that's a first. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's a first. It's not planned to continue, however. We've done everything we can possible to make sure that we've done an amazing representation of Australia, so that it creates a pathway forward, that if it's possible, and not just us four, but people here and people that we were attached to, we've written job statements in preparedness for if it's possible for this to continue or re-establish, that we've already started some groundwork. And I hope to God that it is possible, because it's far more valuable than what us as nurse specialists were able to do at Tarji.
This interview really struck a chord with me, because often our nurses are the unsung heroes of the Defence Force, and they do an incredible job, as this interview has just testified. The mess food at Camp Baird was absolutely fantastic, and they even had a dessert fridge. And soon I became used to dormitory life, the shared shower block, the call to prayer at 5 a.m. The gym was excellent. I used to train there a lot with a very good friend, Senior Representative Philanthropic Kenneth Dellimore of the Salvation Army. Here Kenny describes his role with the Defence and on deployment.
We're really Salvation Army chaplains in Defence. That's what the Salvation Army terms us. But the Defence that doesn't term us that. We're welfare slash morale officers. That's what we are. And so we are in Defence, full-time permanent, and our main bread and butter really is what we call our brew trucks, because we mainly deal with the Army. We don't deal with the Navy or the Air Force really, only on here because we're on deployment. So we follow, what we are is we are accredited into Defence. We are assigned to a unit, and that unit becomes our sponsor unit. The CO becomes we become responsible to our CO, and then we work with our unit. Whatever they're doing, we follow them. We do whatever they do. They go bush, we go bush. Wherever they go, we follow them with our brew trucks, our tea, our coffee, our biscuits, our Anzac biscuits that Joanne makes.
Which are awesome.
Good. And whatever else. When we go bush, we take a lot of variety of chips and chocolates and all sorts of stuff as well with us. So we follow the guys around when they get time for a break and a downtime. That's when we kick in. And so we come in and we do our thing. But of course, the whole point of that exercise is then to have an in. And then when the guys are around the truck and they're talking, that's when we are a listening ear. So they're frustrated with maybe the RSM or the CSM, or they want to lay off on something, or things are not going good at home and they just need someone to listen or to talk to, then that's when our ministry, our role really starts to kick in. And it works. It really works. It's amazing what a cup of tea and cup of coffee do to a digger out bush when they're doing it hard, when they're hungry, when they're tired, or when they're cold, or when they're hot, depending on what it is, because we have cold drinks on ice as well. It's freezing cold because we always have it on ice. It's really a morale booster.
Tomorrow you're off to Afghanistan. What are you expecting from that, or what What have you been told you'll be doing?
What I'll be doing is...
And whereabouts are you going?
Well, I'm going into, the capital is, I presume, is Kabul. They did tell me a particular base I'm going to. I just cannot remember the name at the moment. I was going to find that out this afternoon, but my plane's been delayed 24 hours, so I'll probably sort that out a little later, maybe tomorrow. But I'm going on in inverted commas, a road trip, convoy, to an isolated base where there's not a lot of chaplaincy or welfare support. And they want me to go to this base where these Aussies are and find out what welfare support they might desire or need there. So I'm going to do a recce. I'm going to do an assessment on philanthropic support forward.
After 9 days in Camp Baird, it was time for the second leg of our journey, and that was Iraq, Camp Tarji. On the first occasion we flew to Iraq, as it took 4 goes due to the dust storms, and the C-130 Hercules, or commonly called a Herc by defence personnel, needed some maintenance. We were lucky enough to be invited into the cockpit. By the pilots Jack Timperton and Flight Lieutenant Thomas Sensi. We had an amazing cinematic view of the entire experience, and we were even given night vision goggles to try out, which was absolutely incredible. As we spoke to the pilots about where they were from and what they had done, I realised this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and had to pinch myself that this was actually occurring. We were in the skies of Iraq, flying over the lights of Basra, watching burning oil fields in the distance. I wanted to gain an understanding of what flying a Hercules was like and how it handled. Soon enough, Jack stated that it was like a four-wheel drive and its ability to get out of trouble was remarkable. He then showed how sensitive it was and turned the steering yoke left and right, in which case the plane moved accordingly, much to the surprise of the soldiers of the 3rd Royal Australian Regiment in the back. And these images are of those guys and also the Army History Unit boys. Mel Cadden took this photo, and then you can see the cargo bay as well. So all of this goes in together at the back of the Herc. And the seats are actually quite comfortable, even though they're netting. Yeah, it wasn't such a bad trip. We had experienced several delays in getting to Tarji, as I've before mentioned, due to the bad dust storms occurring in the region. During this flight, we had to cancel our approach to Baghdad and try to fly straight to Tarji. The dust storms worsened, and although the pilots made 3 attempts, the visibility of the airstrip was too poor. And after the final attempt, the Hercules ascended very steeply, and we began the journey back to Camp Baird at the UAE, which was a 9-hour round trip in total, arriving back at 4 a.m. We found out later that we're only 200 metres above Tarji before that last attempt was aborted. On the 4th attempt, we had successfully landed at Tarji. 30 minutes prior to landing, we were instructed to put our body armour on and helmets. The Hercules landed and the cargo bay opened. I will never forget that experience, as nothing can prepare you for it. Even working in the photograph section for 8 years and looking at images of Iraq did not prepare me, and all the oral histories I've done of current conflict soldiers, talking to them about what their experiences were. Unless you're there, then you get it. Even working, as I said, working in the photograph section for 8 years, looking at images of this, you're hit by the burning plastic and the smell of burning rubbish. The sound of helicopters, of Black Hawks and Chinooks in the sky, the dust and the T-walls. T-walls were everywhere to protect against the bombings and bullets. A T-wall is about an 18-foot T-shape of concrete and is placed around the base for protection of buildings. And this is our street. When we exited the Hercules, we were greeted by approximately 10 vehicles 500 metres from the cargo bay of the plane with their lights flashing. We were ushered to walk in a unified manner toward them, and it was that point I thought, you're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. The movie Apocalypse Now entered my brain, but it's amazing how quickly, though, you adapt, and soon all of this became the norm. So, as I stated, these were our streets. All of them were basically identical, and it was really easy to get lost when you first landed. Water pallets were absolutely everywhere. There were water trucks that would come in and out as well to settle the dust, and you can see the pollution in the distance. These were the bunkers that were positioned in strategic places around the base. Often the sirens would go off, but thankfully would be quickly followed by, "This is a test." As I stated, the dust was everywhere, and you never ever felt totally clean, even though we showered morning and night. Some mornings you'd wake up and the air would be that thick with pollution that you couldn't take a full breath. I found that extremely hard coming from Canberra, where the air is so clean. Our point of contact was Captain Michael Traynor, who was the media officer for this deployment. His interview discusses the transition from civilian life to that of military.
Well, after recruit training, which was, you look back on it and you look at the good times and how funny it was, but at the time it was quite a terrible experience. But infantry training, when I went through, was broken over 3 blocks. Now it's a lot shorter, it's only about a month for infantry reservists, but when I went back through in 2004 onwards, there was 3 blocks. And it was quite difficult, it was very challenging. I'd never sort of grown up outdoors, I was always sort of a suburb guy, and played football, etc. But actually getting outdoors and getting eaten by mosquitoes and having to be quite self-reliant was quite a challenge. I'd probably been looked after in a very cosy environment growing up, so yeah, it wasn't an easy transition, that's for sure.
And how did you cope with that?
When you're on those courses, all you can think about is getting out, or what am I doing here? Or you roll out of a pit in the morning, that you've been digging all night, and you're looking at a very misty rifle sight and just thinking about all your mates or people that that are probably going for a surf in a couple of hours' time or doing something different. You start questioning your motivation for joining. So yeah, it was challenging. There was moments on those courses there where I was thinking, this really isn't for me. But I got some advice, and it's probably been the easiest way to get through the army is to, don't fight the green, is the old saying. So you just go with the flow. It makes it a lot easier when you start resisting or fighting that psychologically, because you can't change your circumstances. You have to just go with it, and it makes it a lot easier. So that's a trick I learned, and made it a lot more bearable at the time.
Tarji military complex has quite an interesting history and is a product of Saddam Hussein's regime. It was used to produce chemical weapons before the Gulf War and came under US control after operations in 2003. It is 27 kilometres north of Baghdad, close to the township of Tarji, but it's quite a rural area. The pods that are used as accommodation are housed under concrete vehicle bays, built in the days of Saddam. One thing I remember is the large disconnect to the outside world while being on base, and this was amplified by the fact that we had no experience of the outside landscape. There was no sense of what Iraq was like as a country or a culture. I was in a military bubble. I distinctly remember while we were there in Tarji, a pilgrimage was occurring on the highway close to base, which is known as Route Tampa. Route Tampa is the most dangerous road travelled after 2003 for coalition vehicles. But in 2017, there were thousands of Shiites travelling along it by foot to Kabbalah, and this is the world's largest pilgrimage. Yet we were on the other side of the concrete walls, not seeing or hearing anything of the thousands of pilgrims literally only 1 to 2 kilometres away. Although they were expecting an incident due to the pilgrimage, this did not occur, which is testament to the newfound stability of Iraq and Australian Defence Force. In terms of the mission, Operation Okra is Australia's contribution to an international coalition to fight Daesh in Iraq and Syria. There is an Air Force component as well as Special Operation Task Group and Task Troop Tarji. We visited the 5th rotation of Task Group Tarji, which was a commitment of around 300 Australians working with approximately 100 New Zealanders. It involves logistic and command elements, as well as trainers and force protection. Soldiers from the task unit, which was drawn from 3 RAR in Townsville, were training and mentoring the Iraqi security forces in combat skills to enable them to fight effectively against Daesh and build a stable and secure Iraq. They were trained in military tactics, urban combat, combined arms operations, first aid, IED awareness and disposal, as well as forward air controller course. And although our troops are in non-combatant role, their mission had a direct impact as they trained the soldiers who were going north to fight for Mosul. Tarji was a huge eye-opener on the way the Army works, both on a logistics level and on a team-based level. This is a photograph of Mel Cadden and I with Lieutenant Giles Cornelia, commanding officer of 3 RAR and the Iraqi Special Forces. This photograph was taken at Range 7 with force protection to watch over us, and including getting us to the range and back to base safely. It is in the amber zone, and amber zone is an unsecured area, and this is why we were assigned force protection. Force protection is an incredibly important part of the main mission of Train and Assist. And this is Gabrielle, who is part of force protection. And I put this photo up so you can get an idea of the scale of the range. We were able to spend 9 days on base in Iraq, which I can honestly say had a profound effect on me. I interviewed approximately 30 defence personnel in Tarji and 15 at Camp Baird, 45 interviews in total over the 3-week period. I was able to hear their stories, both professional as well as personal, which was an incredibly privileged position to be in. You bond with people, they open up and talk about military experiences, both good and bad, about deployment life, the patrols, IED attacks, losing best mates, and how proud they are to be able to serve. All were very happy to chat to me, and I felt proud, and they felt proud that the interview would be held in perpetuity at the Australian War Memorial. This experience has changed me both personally and professionally for the best, and was honestly a trip of a lifetime. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Ali, would you consider doing another curatorial rotation in the future?
Definitely. As a curator, as I stated in my paper, it's incredibly important to understand what our troops are going through, especially when the material is donated to the memorial and it's put in our hands to make a correct curatorial decision for the future of the national collection. So that's extremely important that we're on board and on the ground and doing this job. Yes.
I see curators as storytellers
Mm.
with a responsibility. My challenge for you is how do you translate this story to responsibilities for the youngsters who come visitors?
If I was put, well, I believe we do that currently. I think the War Memorial has an incredibly important role, and that's what I stated earlier on in my paper, how my specialisation is current conflict and something I feel incredibly passionate about. I think the Afghanistan Gallery does that incredibly well to let people know what we're doing and why we're doing it. So I think the War Memorial currently does that extremely well. Chelsea.
Going in, was there anything that was very different that you assumed would be one way that was very different from how it actually was?
I totally underestimated how much I valued my own space. And when you're on deployment, you never have your own space. You always are surrounded by people. The only time you're not is when you're having a shower or going to the loo. And that's it. And that's something that was like, because as I said, I'm a cyclist, so I spend hours on the bike by myself. Yeah, you're always with people. But in saying that, I had a beautiful roomie. Her name was Kelsey Nugent, and she was like, after a rough day, we'd go home. Well, not a rough, but after a day, we'd go home and we'd talk about what went on and so forth. And that was one of the really good aspects. So yeah, it works both ways. Yeah. But if any of the AWM staff that are sitting in the audience get the opportunity to deploy, you should take it. Okay, thank you.